guys, welcome to Verity, the show where we aim to be open and honest with you about any and everything. I'm your host, my name is Aaliyah, and today we have our guest, Miss Amina, who is a clinical supervisor and a counselling psychotherapist.
Hi Aaliyah, thank you for having me today.
Great. So, we brought you here, well, I've asked you to come here so that you could tell us a little bit about, what you do and kind of give us more information about sexual abuse and the topic that we're going to be discussing today.
Okay, so firstly, I'm just going to say that I'm not an expert in this field.
Okay.
So I'm just going to share my awareness, my knowledge, and just some examples from my work, really, to support you with this today.
Okay.
I've been working with survivors of sexual abuse for nearly just over 10 years now, males and females, childhood trauma. So a lot of issues related to mental health, related to trauma. So that's a little bit about what I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of interested you to go into the field?
Okay. So just interested in human behaviour, mental health, things that impact and affect people's behaviour, people's mental health. I had a desire to want to support and help. So this is kind of what drove me down this field.
Okay.
And doing that, I came across a lot of issues of sexual abuse, so wanted to train.
Perfect. Okay, so I have a few questions for you today about sexual abuse, and the topic that we're going to be discussing is complex trauma. Could you just give us a meaning or understanding of what sexual abuse actually is?
Okay, so under the Sexual Offences Act 2003 in the UK, there's sexual abuse, sexual assault. There's also rape. So rape is the term rape. The definition of it is oral, anal or vaginal unconsented an act, sexual act where a penis is used. Sexual assault or any form of sexual abuse. This may involve, again, any unconsented sexual contact. This could be fondling somebody without their consent, showing them pornographic images, videos, touching them without their consent, or forcing them to touch somebody else. This could also involve female genital mutilation, masturbating in front of somebody else without their consent, getting naked in front of somebody else, or even watching somebody else, watching other people having sex. So it's quite broad. So I would say, definitely have a look at the Sexual Offences Act, and so it really defines it down. Yeah.
Okay, so what I wanted to go into with sexual abuse was complex trauma. So complex trauma, to my understanding, and you can add on to this as well, complex trauma kind of relates to a child who has grown up in, let's say, a household that is full of abuse, full of neglect, and it's continuous, it just carries on. There's not really any stopping ground unless someone interrupts. So this can be a child getting abused by either the caregiver, which could be their mom or their dad, or, a family member that's close to them. Can you kind of just expand a bit more on complex trauma and what it actually is?
Okay. Yeah, definitely some of the stuff that you've said, and I'd like to add that complex trauma can begin quite early on for somebody, like a child. It can also happen later on in life as well. So if we look at trauma, what is trauma? Trauma is an emotional response to a distressing event or experience. Now, when trauma happens, our nervous system, which is responsible for our functioning, and our nervous system is made up of, the brain, your spinal cord, all the nerves in our body. So it helps us to function, to eat, to sleep, to basically, carry on a daily basis. So when trauma happens, our nervous system gets dysregulated. So when there's complex trauma, like you identified, there could be sexual abuse, there could be neglect, there could be bullying, there could be verbal abuse. So you can imagine with each form of distress, this is constantly probably going on for the individual. Now, our bodies haven't been made to deal with so much distress. Yes, we may go through, we all go through difficult periods. That's just, normal, Our bodies are made to deal with that and for us to carry on. But when there's that constant distress and that constant dysregulation
Yeah.
from the complex traumas, the impact can be huge.
Yeah.
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 So we're not looking at one trauma, we're
looking at different multiple ones.
Multiple traumas. And I think it's really important to highlight that trauma is individual for everybody.
Yeah.
So how you might deal with a difficult situation might be completely different for me.
Yeah.
And then how I respond to that situation might be completely different for you.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So we can both go through something.
Yeah.
You might come out of it like, oh yeah, that was all right. I'm not, but for me, I might be like, oh my God, that's really caused me, nightmares, flashbacks, all sorts. So it's really important to remember that trauma is very personal and very individual to each person.
Would it be common to assume, though, that many people that face complex trauma will have some level of effects of disorganized, like, attachment? So for me, disorganized attachment would be not that you find your perpetrator, like, attractive in any way type of thought, but it's kind of like you have a confused relationship with your perpetrator. So if I was to give you an example of, say, my perpetrator, who was like an uncle of mine, so now it will come to a stage, or it came to a stage where I would see him standing in front of me, but I couldn't recognize the emotions that I had for him, if that made sense. So I'm not frightened, but at the same time, I'm not happy to see you. So it's kind of like, how would disorganized attachment come into that?
Okay, so firstly, talking about disorganized attachment, another term for that is the fearful avoidant attachment. And what's really central to this attachment is fear. So if you mentioned your uncle, if he was your abuser, so you can see automatically this relationship that should have been, trusting relationship, there's a lot of fear around that because he's your abuser. So you can see how, that relationship won't be built on trust. Your safety will be questioned. Your safety is at risk. So that would then put you in a threatening situation whenever you're faced with him. From what I'm understanding, and then we go back to trauma. How your nervous system's responding every single time you're around him. So if you completely shut down or completely froze when you're around him, that avoidance, that fear, that wouldn't be very uncommon. Because your body and your mind is responding to the abuser that's there in front of you.
How would this, I know how it's affected me, obviously, in my later life. But for a majority of people who don't recognize that they have disorganized attachment, how would it affect them? Because for me, I'd say that, I can't form stable relationships with people. Like, for example, even if you're a female, like, I find it difficult to even form relationships with females, because it's kind of like, I don't see why I should trust you enough for you to be a part of my life, if that makes sense. Like, you can show me that you're a trustworthy person and all that kind of stuff, but there's only a certain level of confidence that I can have in a person, if that makes sense. So how can I recognize that this disorganized attachment or fear of attachment has affected me in my later life?
Well, like you've said, the difficulties you're having in relationships, and not everybody who has had abuse as a child may result to having a disorganized, but it's very possible. And often that is where the attachment can come from, the disorganized attachment, the fearful avoidant, because there is a huge fear of attachment, because your trust would have been broken by somebody that should have protected you and kept you safe. So therefore relationships might feel really unsafe. That trust element, being close to somebody, intimacy, it's not that you're not capable of being intimate or being close to somebody. There would be a huge fear around that, where the avoidance might come in, the fear of getting close to somebody or letting somebody into your life. And that doesn't mean that you don't want to be close to somebody, or you don't have that desire or need to want to build close relationships and bonds. There may be some obstacles or blocks that you might feel because of what you've experienced. Attachment styles can be changed. It doesn't mean that because that's, that would be attachment for the rest of your life. If you're aware of it with, getting the correct support or doing your own research, that can be really helpful. If you're aware that I have this attachment, you know, and having that understanding of how it's affecting your life, you can then look at, okay, what can I do to change it? Which, of course, there might be some challenges there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that that would be your attachment with everybody. You may be able to build some secure attachments with some people.
Yeah.
It may require a lot of trust,
Yeah.
you know, on your part, as well as, you know, maybe checking out how much you feel safe around the other person.
I think this ties into the conversation we we're having earlier about being self-aware. And
Yeah.
I said, you know, like for me, being self-aware is kind of like a weapon to myself, because becoming self-aware means that I'm more self-critical. And if I'm more self-critical of myself, it means I'm also being self-critical of others as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if I'm able to recognize for myself that, you know, I have an attachment problem, I can't really do anything about having an attachment problem, if that makes sense. Like I can recognize that I have the attachment problem, I acknowledge it, but then now making the steps of, you know, trying to change myself or trying to change my mentality or the way I think that's where the issue comes into.
Yeah.
So I think now the question is, how can I move from acknowledging it to actually implementing it? Because I can't implement it.
It's very hard. Yeah. And that's completely understandable. You know, because this is probably a way that you've learnt from a very young age.
Yeah.
You know, it's become normal that attachments are scary, getting close to people are scary, is frightening, so I'm going to stay away, you know, going back to your survival state. So that would make complete sense. Also remembering that our brains are hardwired. You know, if it works, you know, the way to keep safe, if it's away from people or avoiding, it'll do it again and again, you know, because that's what keeps you safe, and that's how the brain learnt. So it's about trying to, you know, look at different strategies, recognising that actually, is this holding me back? Is this attachment? Is the way I'm responding and being around people, is it affecting my life? You know, and, you know, it might take time. It might take, again, work on your part, and gently, slowly, you know, untying those really deep-rooted, you know, difficulties that have become very normal. Again, going back to what we discussed earlier, you know, these responses are normal responses from an abnormal situation that you experienced. You know, the abuse wasn't normal. That was abnormal, but the way you're responding is a normal response to abuse. But it's also impacting your life, where you're struggling to now, you know, have healthy relationships. Does that make sense?
It does. Talking about normalizing though, and the normalities of people that have endured sexual abuse, especially when it comes to children and young people, how are we able to allow them to know that they're not the perpetrators? In terms of, if you look at a child and the development of a child, right, they're usually egocentric. So a child usually just thinks about everything being revolved around them. Like this is my world. Everything's about me.
It is their world, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's like everything's about me type of thing. So now, a child who has, you know, gone through, who has endured this type of thing, will now start thinking in their head that, you know, this is my fault. This has happened because it's I'm a bad person. You know, this person has done it to me because I'm a bad person, and I can't go and tell either my mom or my dad or whoever, because they'll blame me, or it's me that'll get punished. They basically will either blame themselves, or they'll try to resolve the situations within themselves. That's why they find it difficult to either express what they've gone through, or to just, you know, talk about it. So when it comes to a child, like normalizing the behavior patterns that might develop, how can we go about that? Like explaining to them, like, you know, it's not you, like it's not about you. It is about you, but it's not about you type of thing. Like, how can we go about that?
I think the first and foremost important thing is that the child isn't the abuser. And, you know, it's really difficult because each child's experience and their environment and how the abuse happened may be very personal. It could be that the parents are the abusers. It could be that it's somebody in a trusted position. It could be that the child hasn't got nowhere safe to go or tell anybody. So it really depends on what's been going on for that child and their safety networks, whether the child has got people that he or she can go to. But definitely if the child has a support network, a support system, has the education, and that's being given to the child about, you know, what is sexual abuse, what is, you know, body boundaries, talking about your body and it's your body, and having the boundaries that nobody should touch or nobody should force you to touch anybody else's body. These are really important conversations to have with the child. Now, if a child has experienced sexual abuse and does disclose, it's so important that the child understands that it's not their fault. Because children, like you said, are, you know, it is, you know, when babies are born in the world, they scream, they cry, they need their needs met. That's just, you know, natural and normal, you know. And when their needs aren't met, this is where you know, it becomes very dysregulated for them, you know, their understanding of the world, making sense of what's going on for them. And if there's you know, something as massive as trauma or neglect or rejection from their parents, of course a child can look at it, okay, what's going on, you know, is it my fault, why aren't I being loved? That can affect a child's self-worth, self-esteem, confidence, like you said, the shame, internalising the experience. I think another area to take into consideration is if there's been grooming going on by the perpetrator, you know, how that presents in the child's life. You know, is a child confused about, you know, the same person that's supposed to be protecting them 1 minute shows love, the next minute is sexually abusing them. You know, that can be very conflicting for a child. It could be that the perpetrator saying things to the child like, it's your fault, you know, you wanted this, you made me do it. So, you know, there's a lot of things that can go on for the child where they can feel that it must be my fault, you know, or if they're not being heard, that can be internalized as I'm not important, nobody wants to know, so you know, it's my fault.
How can we normalize, like, they're being able to actually talk about it, though, or they're being able to actually express the thoughts that is going through their head? Because I think one thing that we also miss when it comes to, you know, young people that have been abused and stuff like that is that when they go through this trauma event for them, we don't understand that we're creating desires, or there's desires within them that are being created. And I think what's fascinating for me that I found was that many of the young people that I've researched and that I've known that have endured sexual abuse and stuff like that, they vary between the line of becoming the perpetrator themselves, if that makes sense. So they find it abnormal to talk about it, because obviously we don't talk about what actually happens to the mind when someone has been abused, how you can easily become, you know, a perpetrator without the right treatment, or you know, without the right resources, you can easily become the person that you don't want to be. So now normalizing that whole talk of, you know, the desires that will arise, if that makes sense. So you have a child now that will go and watch child pornography because they're either curious or because they're trying to what was the word you used earlier? It was like replay or react.
React.
Yeah.
Replay what's happened to them.
Yeah, basically replay what's happened to them. So how can we like come to normalize these types of talks to say that, you know, there is a line, but there's a way that we can also deal with this kind of thing, if that makes sense.
I think, you know, like some of the stuff that you've said there, just to try and break that up. And you know what you're doing here, you know, talking about it, I think that's vital, because when a child has been exposed to sexual abuse, that might become normalized for them. Some children are born into sexual abuse, so sexual abuse could be a daily occurrence and something normal in their life, which isn't normal, but to them it could be normal. That could shape how they view other people, view their behaviour towards other people. They might think that that's the way it's okay to behave in a sexual manner, or be available sexually as well. So helping a child, and the important thing is for us to notice, okay, what's going on for that child, why are they behaving like that, and help that child to understand actually this is inappropriate behaviour. You know, it may require a lot of work with that child to understand what's also happened to that child, to help them to understand that this is not appropriate, and what happened to them wasn't appropriate, it's actually a crime. And if they're reenacting or replaying some of these behaviours, to help the child to understand that as well, that, you know, this is not right, you know, this is sexual abuse, and, you know, we shouldn't be doing this kind of behaviour.
But would you say it's normal for them to have those kind of desires, or for those desires to kind of arise from them?
It definitely can. I mean, I can't say for everybody, but yeah, there could be that possibly can happen, because again, that might be normal for that person. And we have to also remember that sexual arousal from sexual abuse can happen as well. And that's a normal physiological response to, our body responds to being aroused. So if a child's body has been exposed to sexual abuse, then they may miss that arousal. They may think, that they want to feel those strong feelings again. So these things can all play a part in their behaviour. So this is why it's so important to break down, what's going on for that child, what's going on in their mind, what are they thinking, why are they behaving the way they are, and to help them understand that this, isn't normal. This, what they went through was not normal.
Another thing that I wanted to bring up was how culture and religion and faith relates to kind of adds on to the effect of the trauma when it comes to sexual abuse and the stereotype of it as well. I'd say for me personally, not that I didn't want to talk about it, but it was uncomfortable to want to talk about it, if that makes sense. Like, I come from a Black African community, I was never told that I couldn't speak about it, but it was just kind of like, why would I bring it up? Not even why would I bring it up, but how can I bring up that topic to a family member or to my mum to make them aware of what was happening when this is their blood relatives. So what are kind of like your thoughts and opinions around the stereotype? Because I think that's one of the reasons why so many people find it uncomfortable.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I think culture is a big one. It's massive. Religion depends what the different religions say about, if there is anything, I can't really give much about that, I'm afraid, but also how it's interpreted in the person's life. If they're blaming themselves for the sexual abuse, do they then think that they're going to go to hell and God's going to punish them, or their behaviours, or how this feeds into their life? But definitely culturally, the society we grow up in, the values and beliefs that are instilled into us. Now, like you said, that you didn't approach, because how do you approach now? I guess what I'm wondering is, was sexual abuse a topic that was spoken about or talked about? When these things aren't talked about, then what does a child do? Where do they find the language? Who do they go to? If there's also shame involved, the stereotypes involved, then does this affect a child's kind of thought process about, can I go to somebody? Can I talk to somebody about this? If they're internalizing the shame and they're blaming themselves, then there's the stereotypes that, sex is bad, or sexual abuse, you don't talk about rape. Then all these things can definitely add, to a person and how they approach the subject, or even if they access help. Now, another taboo is that men don't get raped, that, men are supposed to be strong. And, I've worked with many survivors of sexual abuse who are male, and it does happen. We see it in the news. Of course it happens, but these stereotypes that it doesn't happen to men, or that men need to be a certain way, that can definitely affect men accessing support and help. Even females, where they've grown up, or the environment they've grown up in, if there is this culture, you don't talk about sex, you don't talk about sexual abuse, or if it's happened and the family are aware, and then there's the blanket of shame, you don't talk about it, this is shameful, then this can silence a person, completely silence a person in getting help and accessing help. So these stereotypes, cultural taboos, stereotypes, beliefs, really do need to be challenged. We're in 2022. Come on. I
think that's one of the things that...
these things do happen, and we hear about it, we see it, and the more we can be open to talking about these issues, because these are serious crimes, that people hopefully won't feel that they need to sit with the abuse or the shame. They can recognise that it wasn't their fault. They can access help. If there's perpetrators, then hopefully they can also recognise that, is there help and support that they can get to look at their own behaviours. Rape crisis, I was looking at their statistics, and for last year it was over 63,000 reported cases. Now that's
and
reported.
Those are the ones that they know about.
They're the ones they know about. Now we don't know the extent. We don't know the real numbers. And this is one of the highest numbers. And we don't know the real facts around. What are the numbers? How many survivors are there out there, or victims being still victimised. But if we can't have these conversations in schools, in homes, then how is anybody going to know any better?
Yeah, that's so true. That's one of, I was going to add on to the one that you said about, stereotype and taboo when it comes to religion and faith. I think one that I found interesting was when perpetrators use religion and faith to manipulate a victim into staying in a situation and stuff like that, because when you read many survivor stories, they'll, like, when it comes from a faith point of view, they'll say that, they used our God against us, or they used the Bible against us, or they used something that was to do with their belief against them to kind of like hold them there and to make them stay there. When it comes now to the healing journey, and you're someone that still wants to believe in your God, and you're someone that still wants to, serve the God and stuff like that, because you can separate the God from the man, or, the belief from the man and stuff like that. How can one now begin a healing process when it comes to their faith being distorted as well?
Of course, and just going back to what the abuser said, like, you mentioned using religion, using God. What we have to remember is some perpetrators will go to lots of lengths to silence, their victim, you know, because so they can continue doing it. And this can feed into the grooming process, the blaming process, the manipulation process, using God or fear or threatening them in lots of different ways. And, of course, that can impact a person hugely, especially if it involves their faith or religion, and can leave that real negative sense towards their religion. But also recognising that it was actually the perpetrator who did what they did. Yeah. And of course, in terms of starting their healing journey, again, I'd definitely say, speaking to a professional, trying to get the some support that would be good for them. Yeah. But yeah, of course, perpetrators can go to lots of lengths, to sexually abuse. So they might use, religion, God, threaten to harm their families. So there's a lot of fear, there can be a lot of fear, involved in silencing a person, which can really distort and affect, especially a young child's thought processes, really cause something called cognitive dissonance, where the person really struggles to make sense of their reality, become really confused that, okay, God is supposed to be somebody I believe in, but at the same time I'm being told God is going to punish me, or the perpetrator's my a relative, and they're abusing me. So it can cause these really conflicting thought processes for that individual. So it can become a very, very complex situation. But remembering it's not their fault, and it is the abuser, the person who is doing the abusing, that the responsibility lies with them.
One thing that I did find interesting, I think for me as well, because this is something that I've realized that I've been doing quite a lot recently, is disassociating. And I know where my disassociation comes from, if that makes sense. But when I was doing my research and stuff like that, they were saying that many survivors who have endured sexual abuse will tend to dissociate to the point where they can separate themselves from their physical body. So it's either whilst they're being abused, they'll draw their mind to either as if they're watching themselves get abused, or they'll create a whole different reality where they won't have to feel exactly what is going on. So this is what's happening to them as they're going through the process. So now that I would say that I'm older and stuff like that, disassociation has become a part of my life, should I say, where it's kind of hard now to be like...
to break away.
Yeah, to break away. So I know that I'm not the only one who's talking through this, but it's kind of like I have two realities. I have the reality of my mind, and then I have the reality of where everyone else is, like the world and stuff like that. But when I'm going through a difficult time, it's so easy for me to regress back into my disassociative state, where I'll completely isolate myself from everyone, if that makes sense, and just kind of like shut myself in my own head. But then it will get to a point where you now can't tell which reality is real. So that's something that I'd like us to discuss, if that's okay. So how would you explain that, or what's your thoughts and ideas?
Why wouldn't you? Firstly, if that's the way you learn to survive and cope, and again going right back to the survival states we talked about, about trauma and being in a threatening state, and the way the mind and body might respond in order to keep you alive. Dissociation is one of them, the freeze response. And again, if your body and mind has recognized that this will keep you alive, then other traumatic or any other time that you feel stressed can also take you back down to that, because that's what your nervous system is used to, almost like a defense mechanism helping you to survive. But as you said, it's still continuing when there isn't that threat. So that's where the difficulty is.
Because the level of, I don't experience trauma now, I hope not anyways, but the level of distress that I experience now is not the same type of level of distress that I experienced then. So it's kind of weird to go back to that state of dissociating where it's even worse now than when it was when it first started, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. And again, it's not uncommon to hear this. And I'm glad that you recognise it and how it's affecting your life, because this is where it can become really unhealthy and really damaging, where there is no threat, but your body's still responding as if there is that high level of threat. Because, again, this is what your body's been doing. And anytime there is stress, it's going back to that automatic shutdown response. And this is the way I need to keep alive, and this is the way I need to survive. So being able to recognise that, and when you do notice yourself dissociating, maybe you can look at strategies and ways to slowly, because that's your safety. So it makes sense that you do that.
That's exactly what I find even weird, because even during conversations, it's like I have to... It's like energy, like I have to genuinely concentrate on you speaking just for me not to draw back inside. This is why I started this whole podcast, because I put this in my presentation where I said, even in high school and primary school and stuff like that, I would get notes back from school, notes sent to my mom saying, your daughter's daydreaming, every single time it was your daughter's daydreaming. And I'm like, okay, cool, but I'm still doing my work. Like I was daydreaming, but I still did my work to the way that they wanted me to do my work. And it's only now that I'm realizing that, okay, cool, it was a coping mechanism, but now it's like the realization is too late, because whenever I try to not dissociate, that's when I'm dissociating even more. So it's kind of like
So in order to get out of the dissociation, you're getting more in a stressful state, which is heightening the dissociation.
So it's kind of like, I think it was just a couple of weeks ago where I was trying to brush my teeth and I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, and it was like a good 10 minutes where I was just trying to like get out of it, but I was just like, I'm standing in front of a mirror, 10 minutes just zoned out. What methods do you think we can use for people like me that dissociate in times like this?
Okay, again, that would be very personal, because dissociation can be on different levels. You may completely dissociate for long periods of time, short periods of time. You may be here talking to me, but maybe physically not really feel it. So that there would be, or there can be lots of different forms of dissociativeness. So depending on what's going on for you. So for you, in terms of dissociative, is there anything specific you're looking for?
I don't know. As I just zone out, like not zone out, but I'm thinking, but I'm not here. Like I'm thinking, like I can hear everything that everyone's doing. I can see what you're doing. Like even though I'm not focused on you, I can still see you like in my peripheral vision. I'm thinking and stuff like that, and I want to talk to you. I want to speak to you. I want to communicate with you. But I can't, if that makes sense. It's like looking through a glass box. It's like I can do all of these things, but I can't.
Are you finding this situation quite stressful?
This is yes and no.
Okay.
Like yes and no. Like if I'm finding something stressful, you see, because my mouth begins to alter. Like I stutter. I can't breathe. Basically.
How's your body feeling?
Uncomfortable.
Okay. Why don't you just ground yourself? So in times of dissociation, it's going into that freeze state. Your body isn't online. It's not being accessed. It's that survival state. And something that you've recognised has been going on for you from a very young age. So bringing your body online, allowing your body to feel that, I am here, I'm present. So even putting your feet against the floor. So if you try that, put your feet against. Is that uncomfortable for you? Is that difficult?
Yeah, because okay. This is the things that this is something that I struggle to tell people. Not that I was taught, but my mind taught itself to lock me inside my own body. I don't know how to explain it. So even if I was to you know how people say, you know, just dance freely, like express yourself.
Hard for you. It's not as
It's
easy.
so difficult.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
I can
Because
feel.
freeze is what your nervous system is used to.
Yeah.
So even me saying to you, okay, just put your feet, just to try and reassure you that you're safe, you're held, you're grounded, it's really difficult. So just doing something gentle, just like maybe touching the pillow, you know, just little things like that to allow your body to start feeling, okay, it's okay, I'm safe now. Even just telling yourself. Now, these are basic things.
Yeah.
Of course, depending on the severity of what somebody's going through, you know, that would have to be assessed and to look at, you know, what support they need. But just gentle things, even just like letting yourself know, recognizing when you're going into this shutdown state, you know, gently trying to find things, even, you know, things that help you keep safe, keeping them at hand, anything that brings you safety, really. So, you know, because when somebody goes through trauma or sexual abuse, which is very traumatic, a person's window of tolerance, how much they can tolerate, becomes very small.
Yeah.
Because of the trauma, they're in just survival state. So all the bodily resources, the, you know, everything that we need to survive and cope with it, it becomes really restrained because you're just trying to survive, and that's where all the energy and everything goes into.
Yeah.
So you want to gently start opening that, you know, so your nervous system and your body and mind starts to get used to different ways of coping in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And then, you know, to help your mind and body to recognize, actually, I don't need to dissociate, because at the moment your mind is doing what it needs to do, because it thinks, okay, you know, Aaliyah's stressed out, so let's go back there again and shut it out and save her. But for you, of course, as an adult, you know, that worked for you as a child, because it needed to help you survive that situation. But as an adult now, you want to be functioning, you want to get out there, you want to meet people, you want to do your job, you want to work, you want to focus with talking to me, you know, and you know, these are healthy, normal things that, you know, of course, you know, it's required, you know, in order to carry on and function, you know, in the world and society. But of course, because of your experience, it's very difficult for you, you know. So identifying is really important. You know, that's already broadened your awareness. And, you know, looking at, you know, what support do you need to work with what you've recognized, you know, to work with the fact that, yeah, you know, I do go into this frozen state, and it is quite disabling. It's not letting me do things that I'd like to do. You know, what support do I need? What can I look into? You know, how can I help myself? You know, maybe trying different strategies. What helps you to feel so you don't keep going into that frozen state?
How can I personally come out, how to explain this? How can I come out of that? Because like I said, like I can acknowledge something, should I say, like becoming self-aware and all that kind of stuff is great and everything. But then, like you said, implementing things, like doing things step by step, small things and all that kind of stuff. My mind has taught myself, like, flight, it's all or nothing. You either go into one thing and you do it straight and you do it perfectly, or you don't do it at all. That's genuinely how my mind thinks. So it will either freeze at an expense or it will just go for it.
Yeah, so there's no middle ground.
Risk. Yeah. So...
Okay.
Coming up with like small healthy habits, like what small healthy habits that I can do to just kind of like, if I'm having a conversation with someone and I can feel my mind drifting, or if I'm, you know, watching a movie and instantly it's like, you know, how can I just, what are the small things I can just try maybe to just kind of like bring myself back, like, you know, just gently, slowly, like.
Firstly, I'll say I'm not an expert in dissociative, dissociation. But, you know, how I'd work with a client if they were dissociating, it would be a lot of gentle work, very slowly, gently, because, again, the body and nervous system isn't used to this. So being aware, like we've said, you know, you're aware that, okay, when you're drifting off, so trying to bring your focus back, you know, what can you do to bring your focus back? And also, you know, not forcing yourself or pushing yourself, you know, really opening your awareness, you know, really gently, slowly, trying different things that help you be present. And definitely I'd say, you know, to maybe, if you're open to speaking to somebody who can support you in this area, to help you gain further awareness and understanding and develop those skills, you know, to help you. So it doesn't, you know, take control of your life.
The last thing that I wanted us to talk about was self-identity. I think one of the things that we tend to do, for me especially, to regulate my emotions I can feel my emotions and stuff like that. Like I know what emotions I'm feeling, but to express them or to show them for me is quite difficult. I don't really know how to do that. And I think this comes back to to my upbringing as well. Like if I felt a certain type of way, there was no one there for me to express my emotions to. So it was kind of like either there's no point or it's me that I'm going to express my emotions to, if that makes sense. So say growing up in this type of environment now, when it comes to me now expressing how I feel to someone when I'm older and stuff like that, it's a bit shut in. Like it's kind of it comes out wrong. If I want to give someone a present or I want to say something to someone, I'll either say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, if that makes sense. So working through this, like how can I work through this now as an adult in terms of like just trying to find myself, trying to express my emotions the way how I want to. Like how can I actually
Just to highlight, you know, from what you've shared and what you've been through and the difficulties and the culture that you've shared, that you've experienced, you know, that you don't talk or there's nobody there to express to. And I think values, beliefs, culture, the environment we grow up in, you know, when there is abuse involved, that can have a massive impact on how you then respond and react in the world, and your way of communicating and you know, your communication with others. That can of course be impacted as well. And just recognizing that, I think that's you know, a massive step forward, that these are blocks and difficulties I'm experiencing. Sorry, I forgot the question.
It's okay.
I've gone off on one.
No, it's fine. How can I
communicate,
like express my emotions
so
and stuff like that?
Just going back to the fact that, you know, of course, you know, because of the difficulties, it makes complete sense that you'd, you know, experience blocks, but it doesn't mean you can't overcome them. You know, just recognize that this is the way you survived or learned to survive or had to survive as a child. Does it mean now that as an adult that you have to, that there are blocks? And again, it may require, you know, that support system, getting support, talking through or looking at various ways that you can overcome these blocks. You know, difficulties you find, and you know what comes up for you in being able to express and being able to communicate effectively, because it's not just the abuse you've been through, it's how it's shaped your world and shaped the way you see things and feel and hear, and you know how you are present in you know in the you know in this world as well. That's all sounds like it's all been quite distorted from the experience.
I think for me it leads into self-destructive behaviours, because that's something that I did quite a lot to myself, because I lacked understanding in what it is that I was feeling or what it is that I was actually going through. So if I didn't understand a certain type of emotion or something like that, in order for me to understand it, I smoked a lot of weed when I was growing up, just to try and avoid a lot of emotions that I was facing that I didn't understand. So I don't want to say drug abuse because I feel like that's so harsh, but I say drug abuse is one of my coping mechanisms back then. But then also kind of like just doing things that didn't really benefit me. So my mom always says that I'm a clever kid, but I don't think I'm that clever, because to me, I've always like, when you go to high school, you get bullied every once in a while and stuff like that. To me, I was not that smart. So, but to my mum, I was very, very smart and stuff. So a lot of the times, whenever I had an opportunity to either, you know, increase my career or to add awards onto my name, I went the opposite way. So if I had like a music competition or something like that, or if I had to do something that would benefit me, I did something that would destroy me, if that makes sense. So I ended up victimizing myself as well, like re-victimizing myself into when I started getting older, if that makes sense. So how could I then begin to unravel that whole self-destructive behavior, to kind of like actually value myself, to know who I am, to kind of steady myself? Like, how can I go about that?
Just going back to what you said first about the weed and taking drugs, and definitely sounds like that was your way of coping and dealing with, you know, some form of distress that was going on for you. Again, survival, trying to cope. And, you know, when we have experiences, we're struggling to regulate or understand what's going on, not just the experience, but the emotions that are coming up with that. There's a gentleman, he came up with the term mentalization. His name's Peter Fogati. You could look him up if you want to. But he talks about mentalization, and that's a really important aspect in a lot of the work that, you know, professionals, therapists, you know, they might do in mental health, because it helps to make sense, you know, of the experience, what's gone on for the person, about their behaviour, and also understand other people as well and the effect on other people. Now, as a young child, if you've had experiences where you haven't had, you know, the mentalization, where you haven't been able to go to somebody or talk to somebody, or somebody hasn't said, okay, you know, Aaliyah, this has happened, and maybe this is why you're feeling sad, or, you know, this is all this dysregulation that's going on for you, and you're not being able to make sense. So, you know, you can't make sense of the situation, so you're beginning to turn to other things to cope with what's coming on for you. And this is just what I'm picking up. I could be completely wrong. Just tell me if I'm wrong. That's absolutely fine. So your self-worth and having some understanding about yourself.
Yeah.
You know, about what went on for you, you know, being able to have compassion that it wasn't your fault.
Yeah.
This was you trying to survive and cope with some really, really tough things.
Yeah.
A lot of trauma that you've experienced and gone through, and recognizing the self-destructive behaviors, and do you need to do them now? You know, like, what purpose is it serving now? How is it affecting your life? How is it affecting others? As well as, you know, again, going back to, you know, is there support network? You know, what support networks can you access? Are there any professionals that might be able to help you, or anybody else that's struggling with self-destructive behaviours? Because, you know, most likely they are a survival mechanism, you know, trying to cope and survive, and see that quite often, whether it's through self-harm, drugs. And I'm not saying everybody who takes drugs or alcohol or self-destructive behaviours is sexual abuse, but clearly it's, you know, a lot of the times it is a way of survival and coping, and just recognising that and then seeking help would really, you know, and hopefully be able to kind of, you know, limit that self-destructive behaviour.
And I do understand that people obviously are on different spectrums when it comes to the effects of sexual trauma on them. So I know that some people can either be, for me, I wouldn't say for me actually, I know that some people can be very promiscuous, and then others can be very shut in, where they just don't want any contact or physical contact at all and stuff like that. So would you be able to explain the different things that they might enjoy, like the I think I forgot the name of it, the different ways that people might experience sexual trauma, that if they were able to identify in any of these areas, then it would be best, if they wanted to, if they felt comfortable to kind of like reach out for help from either a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist or a sexual health doctor.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the effect and impact from sexual abuse can be massive. You know, we're looking at, okay, the act, the sexual abuse, that's the crux of it, but then with that might come anger, shame, isolation, you know, guilt. Person might blame themselves. Like you said, the promiscuous behaviour might involve, you know, wanting to take control of your body, so wearing inappropriate clothes or getting into inappropriate situations to be in control of yourself, and you know, I've seen that happen as well. Or you know, sexual behaviours that are quite risky or dangerous for the person. Now again, it is about trying to recognise that and how it's affecting the person. You know, there could be this could then fester into their personal life, private life, their studies, their home life, sleeplessness, flashbacks, nightmares. It's endless. You know, we're looking at literally like a ripple effect, and that can affect their life in so many ways. So recognising, you know, what's going on, you know, and it is about sometimes that self-awareness, or if somebody else points it out. And sometimes people, when they're going through trauma, they might not be able to be aware because of what they're going through. Could be dissociation, or somebody else might point out. So just trying to really understand yourself better. If there is sexual abuse or trauma and you're aware of it, then looking at how it's affected your life. You know, maybe looking at your triggers, you know, behaviour, how it's affected your behaviour, affected your life, and, you know, asking, do I need some help with this? You know, do I need to go and see somebody? Do I need to talk to somebody?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you guys for joining us today, and thank you, Miss Amina Begum, for joining us. Thank you for everything that you've shared. If any of you have any questions, any concerns, or any thoughts about what we've discussed today, please feel free to message us and to get in touch with us. Thank you.